Hi, it's May 6, 2025. Richard Dwyer of dwyercrime.blog. Let's talk about the Diddy case. I've done a little bit more research here. But first, remember, the opinion you should follow should be your own. Just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. Folks, I know Diddy is literally fighting for his freedom, right? It's going to be uphill for him. Now, I'm very sympathetic, and I believe there are people like me out there who are very sympathetic to his argument that he was living a swinger's lifestyle, that the people around him were living a swinger's lifestyle, that everyone knew what happened at freak-offs, and that they came to the freak-offs voluntarily. What happened at the freak-offs is kind of like a what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas type of thing. No one should be responsible for anyone else's actions at the freak-off, right? The problem with that defense, why it's uphill for him, why a man in his 50s like him is looking at jail for several years, is the issue of domestic violence, right? Understand, we've all seen the hotel surveillance footage where he is physical with his ex-girlfriend Cassandra Ventura, right? Cassie Ventura. Just understand that there are going to be at least 3 other victims alleging that Diddy was physical toward them, right? The problem with visual evidence that the defense is going to have to admit accurately depicted the domestic violence, the physical violence of Diddy toward his girlfriend, is that the jury, in my opinion, is going to reach the conclusion, looking at the film, which the judge has already deemed as admissible evidence, and they're going to reach the conclusion that Diddy's not a good person. They're going to reach the conclusion that Diddy, at a minimum, was physically abusive to at least Cassandra Ventura, right? It's also going to give added credence to the tales of other people, other people's recollections of being victimized by Diddy, whether or not there's film evidence of those encounters. Diddy is going to look like he is a serial abuser. That by itself would result in years of prison, right? Understand, Cassandra Ventura, if the jury believes her, Diddy's finished. The film that took place in a hotel hallway of Diddy being physical with her, right, is going to hurt Diddy. It's going to give credibility to his ex. Now understand, the full scope of her testimony involves being forced to engage in sexual activity before him, right? So if I'm a juror and I see this hotel surveillance video, my conclusion is going to be that Diddy was physical, committed domestic violence, hit his ex, right? Then if she talks about being forced into sex acts, she's going to have more credibility because at a minimum, I know she was battered. right? I know that from the hotel surveillance video, right? Well, just understand, her testimony of being forced into sex acts dovetails into the prosecution's narrative that many people were forced into sex acts at these freak-offs. Now, where I have problems, and I know this is an unpopular position, right? But where I have problems is just because I'm the host of the party doesn't mean that I'm responsible for everything that happens at the party, right? If I invite you over and I'm Hugh Hefner, right? And I say, hey, come to the Playboy Mansion, right? And if you bring meth, somebody else brings coke, somebody else brings prostitutes, I might even have prostitutes at the party, right? That doesn't mean that I should be responsible for someone using meth, using coke, being involved with a prostitute who I did not invite to the party, right? In other words, there should be a limit. There should be a limit to what I'm responsible for. Now, parts of these freak-offs were filmed, right? Apparently, if you believe the prosecution, the films show unwanted sex, right? Again, they're going to have to show a link between Diddy and the unwanted sex, right? For me, it's like owning a hotel where I invite guests in, right? Let's say it's a swingers hotel. I'm hosting a swingers convention, right? I advertise it as such. I invite consenting adults in, and while consenting adults are there at the party, there's some psycho who may have been uninvited, or who may have been invited and may have received, a list of what's proper behavior and what's improper behavior. And of course, the person then crosses the line, engages in sexual assault and rape. Am I the sponsor of the party? Maybe the host of the party? Maybe a celebrity host of a party? In other words, some other organizers put together an event and I add my name, right? Sean Diddy, freak off. Am I responsible for everything at the party? Also, it's 2025. Let's stop being shy about sex. We're hearing about 1,000 bottles of baby oil. Let me ask a question. What's wrong with that? If I announce that I'm going to host an orgy, and people show up, and there are a lot of people there who are ready to participate in an orgy, what's wrong with me having, lubricant at the party? Right? What's wrong with me having liquor at the party? Right? What's wrong with me as long as people consent to this? Filming parts of the party. Right? So let's just say I believe that the prosecution wants a conviction. They've released a lot of salacious stuff in the public eye. I'm not sure if you can tie all of that to Sean Combs. But what you can tie to Sean Combs is his behavior on film in the hallway of the hotel with the star prosecution witness. Right? Understand, the film is so powerful, it speaks for itself, so to speak. Right? I can see how Sean Combs treated her. So then, of course, that's the tip of the iceberg. She has other testimony. about being forced to do certain things, right? Behind closed doors with third parties, right? That's going to be extremely troublesome. Let me also say this too, and this is something that Combs is responsible for, right? To the extent that he owned the premises where things took place, to the extent that this is a public advertised event, right? Come to my freak off. If he had underage people at the freak off, just like a bar, if they're open and underage people are in the bar and you serve them drinks, you don't check IDs, right? If you have underage people at the bar who cannot legally consent to sex and they're involved in sex acts at the party, and if they provide testimony linking Sean Combs to whatever invitation they received to be at the party, right? To the extent that people at the party were acting on Sean Combs's behalf and so testify and served liquor and alcohol to underage attendees, then Diddy's finished, right? If not at this criminal trial, then at a civil trial, right? So just understand, this is uphill for Diddy. In prior statements he himself made, he's said that he didn't act appropriately toward his ex, right? Domestic violence, you can't come up with a consent defense, right? It's clear that Cassandra Ventura is not consenting to being physically roughed up in the hallway of the hotel, right? So just understand, some of Diddy's defenses are imperfect, right? Where he's saying, hey, look, the people at the parties, they were all consenting participants. His ex is going to testify that she was not, that she was forced into sex acts, whether at the party or elsewhere, by Sean Combs. Other people are going to come forward. They're going to make that claim as well, right? It will be interesting to hear what sex workers, and according to the prosecution, Sean Combs hired sex workers to be at these freak-offs, right? It'll be interesting to hear from them at the trial what instructions they were given, right? It's crucial testimony, because if a sex worker hired by Diddy or a Diddy representative, and the prosecution's going to have to show all this, was told to, be hyper-aggressive, not wait for consent, to, take advantage of people who were drunk or on drugs, if they testify that they were hired to bring drugs with them, then that's really going to hurt his case, right? So it's uphill for Diddy. I'm not sure if he gets convicted of all of the charges against him, but let's just say the hotel video is going to hurt him. If jurors believe Cassandra Ventura, particularly after seeing the video, which might give her more credibility, and if they believe the full scope of her testimony, then Diddy is looking at several years in prison. Understand, he's not a man in his 20s or 30s. He's in his 50s. Right? Just understand that, he's looking at enough time to be removed from, social culture until he's a much older man. Those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours. Let me also say, too, there's another part to the Diddy case. It concerns witness intimidation and obstruction, right? The prosecutors are claiming that Diddy use these freak-offs and videos from the freak-offs to blackmail or influence people who were in compromising positions at the freak-offs. Now, these charges are serious. You can't overlook them. Don't just look at the, sexual assault claims, the domestic violence claims. Understand, the blackmailing could directly link Diddy to some prominent people. In other words, his freak-offs were attended by some celebrities. We're hearing Terrence Howard talk about, Diddy events. If anyone of that stature takes a stand and talks about a conversation they had with Diddy himself, in other words, direct culpability, direct participation in wrongful acts, right? It's going to cast a light on everything that happened. It's going to give everything that happened a certain Jeffrey Epstein type glow, right? Where in the Epstein case, and I know the Epstein case should be irrelevant from this one, but you and I know we're in a climate where, one of the whistleblowers on Jeffrey Epstein recently committed suicide, right? People, see Prince Andrew in a photo next to the woman who committed suicide at a Jeffrey Epstein party, and they're thinking to themselves, wow, was Jeffrey Epstein a figure who got people in compromising positions, had information about people, private information, and then used it to influence other things, right? Any testimony by any celebrity, anyone known to the public, that they received a phone call from Diddy hinting at any kind of video or any kind of threatened leak of private activities that took place at a freak-off involving that person is going to be extremely detrimental to Diddy. One of Diddy's best defenses in this case is the idea that he wasn't directly involved in any wrongdoing, right? Drugs at the freak-off, I didn't tell anyone to bring drugs. The drugs weren't mine. I wasn't involved in the purchase or sale of drugs. To the extent that someone came to my party and brought drugs with them, that's their business. That's not mine. That's like someone bringing drugs into a hotel room. It doesn't mean that the owner of the hotel wanted that to happen, endorsed it, consented to it, ratified it, right? But if they're going to try to prove blackmail, somebody would have had to have made the threat to a celebrity. If there's a blackmail operation, there would be a custom and practice, right? Some routine that they're running down on multiple people, right? If some major celebrity or some known celebrity, could be an A-list, B-list, C-list celebrity, someone who's been on TV, someone who's been in the movies, perhaps a comedian, perhaps an actor, even just someone who has a vibrant business, right? Interior designer, a political commentator. If anyone of that stature testifies that Diddy or some Diddy representative who is cooperating with the prosecution threatened to expose their activities at the freak-off, Diddy's finished, right? Then it's going to look like this is some elaborate, coordinated, intentional setup to, leverage influence in other areas. Folks, it's uphill for him. The hotel video, that's a powerful piece of evidence. I don't know how he unrings that bell. The fact that his ex is alleging so much more, that's powerful. Right? The blackmail claims, that's powerful. The videos as to what actually happened at the freak-offs, they're going to have to link to Diddy. In other words, they can have videos that show people getting raped at a freak-off. Right? The question is whether the rapist is acting on their own or at the direction of the accused. Right? That part's going to be hard to prove, in my opinion. The baby oil and stuff like that, look, you're hosting an orgy. I'm sure there was a lot of baby oil at the Playboy Mansion. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Let me hear yours in the comment section of this YouTube video. Thanks for stopping by.